Everybody, hello, welcome. How you doing today, Kwesi?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well.
Excellent.
All right, well, hi everyone. We'll get right into it. Thanks so much for joining today. This is the Culture Clinic show. So on this show, we help people leaders shape great workplace culture where people are inspired to do their best work. My name is Julia. I'm on the people team here at Gusto. I'm here today to talk with Kwesi and sort of interview him or sort of AMA style, all about biggest recognition program mistakes. So before we get into it, Kwesi, hello, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I am Kwesi Thomas. Started my career off in I've been in high tech for a lot of my career, but in HR. I was at Nortel for a while, then BlackBerry, and then Shopify for a little while, and then been consulting and helping some other companies for helping grow their culture, grow their businesses since Shopify. And I think for me, I've been in recognition from really early on. I've been in recognition for when I joined BlackBerry. I actually had a title at one point called Manager of Global Recognition Program. So it's a topic I love, and I've had some time in. So excited to talk today about the biggest mistakes.
Awesome. Well, we're glad to have you here, Kwesi, as an expert in all things recognition.
Oh boy.
And today, just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. First thing, if you're finding LinkedIn Live to be a little bit choppy, please join us on YouTube. We found that YouTube is like seamless experience. So Kaylee has posted the YouTube link on the LinkedIn Live comments. So if you're finding some choppiness, just head over there and join us. And second off, today is an Ask Me Anything. So Kwesi's here. I'm here to add a bit of color where I can, but really to answer any questions about all things recognition program mistakes. So if you're having issues or challenges that you're facing in running your recognition program, just leave us a comment and we'll be sure to address it. With that, I think we'll hop in. So Kwesi, let's start broad, and then we'll kind of dig into a couple of key recognition mistakes that we see. But first of all, like, what would you say are kind of the biggest overall mistakes you're seeing organizations make with their recognition program?
I think it's good to remember what a good program looks like, right? A good program, to me, it's easy to use. It's got good funding. It's frequent. It's part of your culture. It's got meaningful rewards. So if you take those 5 things, that's sort of what a good program looks like. The mistakes kind of jump off the page quite well. The first one, I think we make it complicated, is probably the first one. The second is we underfund it, or we try to do too much with smaller budgets. The third, managers and the people doing the recognition aren't coached or aren't trained and ready to use the program in the way that they should. And I think we'll talk about it a bit later, but I'm not referring to necessarily the technical use of the program, but the more of the why recognize, when should I recognize type of mistakes. What I see really often is the leadership buy-in and the resourcing of the team. Like, recognition often is part of someone's job who is, sometimes more junior in the organization, et cetera, but the team hasn't been resourced and have the leadership buy-in and the support it needs on an ongoing basis to really get the impact across the organization, right? The next being it's meaningful rewards. And so that's the rewards people are actually receiving. Are they the right rewards? Are they happy to receive them? The last one is, we don't change them quickly enough. We built it and it's this great leaning tower of pizza and we won't change it, right? So let's, the last one's, being able to adjust to how the program actually is, functioning in the wild, in the company.
Yeah. We're not good at failing and kind of like learning from mistakes and adjusting as we go. Cool. So Kwesi started by sort of mentioning, like, what the best recognition programs are. So they're easy to use. They're well funded. They have frequent recognition built in. They're really embedded in your culture. And at the end of the day, the reward that employees are getting are meaningful. And just wanted to flag that if anybody, is like, oh, I want to hear a little bit more about that. We're not going to talk about sort of the best recognition program design today, but we do have lots of other, AMAs and videos that we've covered lots of those topics. So do feel free to check those out if any of those, like, you want to zoom in on a little bit. But mistake number 1, or one of the biggest mistakes we see organizations make when designing the recognition programs are that they're too complicated. They overcomplicate it. So what are some ways you see organizations do this, where they just make things a little bit more complicated than is optimal?
Yeah, for me in designing most programs, but let's just go recognition very specifically. If I can remove a step or remove a hurdle that the leaders have to go through to give recognition, or that the employees have to go through to receive recognition, then I want to remove it. It's almost like cut all the fat and then cut some more, right? And so often we see that, this is the process of giving recognition. There's an extra login, and there's an extra password, and there's an extra, training to use sometimes very complex tools with too many options in it. You're trying to go, it's too complicated. And so you're giving out a $10, $15, $100 recognition, and you're in there for half an hour trying to remember how to use it and pulling up job aids to do. So if you make the process of giving recognition easy, that's probably one. The other complication we see often is limits and approvals. You'll often see that where it's really complicated on, I want to give $100, but that requires a director or above, and it requires other approvals. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be some controls, but within reason, most recognition programs aren't giving out, $1,000, $5,000 awards often. So on the small ones, make it so that people can do it quickly. And sometimes it just takes too much time. So you're asking someone to give out a $5 coffee card through a program, and that's taking them half an hour to do it. Well, dang it, I just go take them the coffee. It was much easier and a better use of my half an hour. And so make sure that, you've kind of right-sized the work involved and what's coming out of it. And then the last one for me is in terms of complicated. Sometimes when you're starting off, you launch your recognition program. It's like, you want to do everything all at once, day one, all managers across the globe, all employees, peer-to-peer, all this. And it's like, it just got way too complicated for us to digest and make it part of our culture. And so, like I said, a few things there, but for me, you keep the process simple. You remove any steps that you can, keep the limits and the approval simple. Make sure that the work that's going into it is appropriate for the reward that's coming out of it. And then you just, you make sure that the scope of the program, the company's ready to accept what you're asking them to do.
Awesome. Your comment around sort of like multiple approvals and extensive processes, it kind of reminds me of like the biggest faux pas of performance reviews, which is like, give feedback, critical or positive, give feedback when it happens. The performance review should literally just be a review. And so you never want to get to a performance review and be like, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me this earlier? Why didn't you tell me this at the time? And in this case with recognition, I think somebody would feel similarly. If you're not able to get recognition for, say, a full week or a full quarter after the thing that you want to recognize happened, you're really kind of losing that sweet spot of positively reinforcing the behavior in the first place.
Yeah. I had a CEO at one point. I was a CEO, I was a head of sales. When I was doing recognition, he told me, you need to get this program out of my way. I have to sell things. I have quotas to hit. I want to recognize my team, but you can't make it so that recognize my team is more work than selling my product. Make it super simple. Get out of my way, right? You use the program.
And how did you do that? How did you do that in this case?
I think for a while I just told him to email me. I'll do his recognition for him. and then after a while we took some steps out of the system because it takes time. You can't do everything on a dime, right? So it took some time to take some of the steps out of the process that were unnecessary, and largely to do with approvals. And once we kind of got out of that way, he was smooth sailing. I think at that time we had I think he was a VP, he was a senior leader, and still had to get approvals. And he's like, I can go spend $100,000 in my budget, but you want me to get approvals for my $5,000 recognition? Like, this makes no sense. Get that approval out of my way. And so it took a little bit of time, but I eventually got out of his way.
Nice. Yeah, cool. So your role sort of as the recognition program owner in that scenario is make it easier, take barriers out of the way so that people can just like do the thing they need to do in that case, which is recognize.
Yeah, it was a huge learning curve for me personally, because I think eventually one of the things I took away was like, we can manage the outliers. Like all the things we're putting all these rules in place to guard from, that's going to happen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of the time. And we can manage those, but let's not make the 95 to 98% work within this complicated system to try to manage those out.
Cool. Love that. Awesome. Well, let's get to mistake number 2. So the another sort of big thing that we see organizations could be doing better in designing their recognition program. You mentioned it's that they're underfunded or they're trying to do too much with too little. Elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I will say to me that I will say this could be number one, and only the fact that it is to me it's the killer for a program. The other mistakes you can work around, but underfunding the program or trying to do too much or too little, then people just devalue the use of recognition and they devalue the recognition itself. And once you've kind of had that permeate through your organization, it's really hard to pull that back and undo it. And so often we'll see people, they've built a program, but if across a large number of people, it works out to be, I don't want to use a number, but it's an immaterial amount of money that you're recognizing people with. And the managers really have a small budget every month or every quarter, whatever it is. And so they end up not using it because it really wasn't worth, what they're trying to recognize. So they're trying to recognize people for doing all sorts of work going above and beyond, but they're saying, hey, thanks for going above and beyond this great achievement, but now enjoy, something small, right? And so I know the reward itself isn't necessarily what, the importance part of it, but it is important because it does, if it's out of whack, it creates a problem. And so often we see programs, underfunding the program or trying to do too much with that underfunded budget. So for me, if I got an underfunded program or a program I can't get the budget I want, I may have to take that budget and focus it right on pick a department, marketing, right? And I know it's not, we want it for the whole company, but hopefully that will build our business case to go and get the 4x, 5x, 10x budget we needed for the whole company. But doing it for everyone with way too smaller budget, to me, it's a slow death of a program.
Interesting. Okay, I'm glad you zoomed in on that sort of before I got the chance. But it's tough times economically, and I know a lot of organizations are trying to do more or the same with the same budget or with less budget. And so your suggestion there, if you're going into sort of a fiscal year where budgets are tighter than you'd like them to be, but you really want to launch this great recognition program, rather than sort of launching like a measly recognition program, maybe for the whole organization, your suggestion would be kind of like dial into what the department that needs it most, or how would you sort of, how would you make that decision?
So there's probably two different models. So let's go with the one I said first, which is might focus it on an area. And that area could have been a vertical, like a department. It could have been a horizontal, like a layer of the company. And it could have been our call center across. It could have been the layer that needs it, that needs it. And will also help you prove the business case that you need for the larger one, right? And that slice might be in all sorts of different ways. That is hard to do. I'm not saying by any means I've been in the seat where telling the other leaders you don't have it or that budget's being used for something is hard to do. So I know it's not easy. The second approach for me would be to give less monetary rewards, make them meaningful when they're given, but still do a lot of non-monetary awards. And this is manager to employee programs I'm referring to. So that recognition is still happening often, the muscle is still being built, but when an award is given, you're not giving out 10 $5 cards, you're giving out 2 $25 cards, right? But I still want you giving out those 10 recognitions. That's the hard part, right? And we all know that without sort of that monetary tie, a lot of times it's hard to get the managers to want to go in and do that activity anyway. But I can't tell you the $10 $5 option versus the 225 or the 150. It's a slow death, right? Because then the manager's kind of go, I did all this work to give out $5. And the employee goes, I did all that work, you gave me $5, right? And so it's not easy. By no means am I saying that this is easy, but I think for in the long run of the program, it makes all the difference.
Cool. Okay. Love that. Awesome. So mistake number 3, what are we seeing, areas of growth for organizations when setting up their recognition program is kind of at the manager level. And so I assume we're sort of talking about a manager to peer program here as well, but, managers aren't being coached or trained, or at the very least, it's not a muscle that they are kind of like working on enough to have recognition be a habit. Tell us about like why that's a mistake, why that's a slow death, kind of obviously, and then how we can combat it.
Yeah, it's funny. We kind of assume they should know how to give recognition, and I think that's a mistake. They probably don't. And whether you have managers who are, I'll use my own history. I had a lot of the companies I was working at had a lot of engineers, and they wanted very defined ways of saying they did X, they get Y. They achieved, and it was very like, tell me what they have to do, and I'll give them what they're supposed to get. And that, yeah, and so in that environment, we have to do a lot more guides and a lot more training and helping them know, what do they qualify for. And I've been in other areas of the company where it's like, where they're more comfortable making just a judgment gut call on what they think is appropriate. And so teaching managers why they should give recognition, when they should do it, and that is really important, because some people will not be comfortable knowing when they should and why they should do it. Okay. And the next one's how. And I think this is really important, because recognition to me, aside from the reward itself, how you actually say the thank you and how you actually show the recognition has to be in a way that the employee is going to receive it and actually internalize it. And so for some people, that isn't at the all hands meeting with all the companies standing up and looking at them. It could be, it could be in the one-on-one where you've actually brought up and said it, right? Or for some, it is in the all hands meeting. But you have to be able to understand your team and figure out how to give recognition and what's meaningful. And sometimes, these tools we have now have made it so easy to just go and put in the tool, press send, and you're like, I did my job, I gave them recognition. Well, you did. You sent them an email amongst the 100 emails they got today. But did you actually make the meaningful impact of saying thank you, right? And so there is a balance to be struck there. No knock on any of the tools, but
Totally. No, it's a good point. And I think this is something that like at Gusto we can get even better at, is sort of making sure we're meeting people where they're at in terms of being recognized. And like you said, either building that into the onboarding of the recognition program or employee onboarding of like, how do you like to be recognized? Because like,
right.
If you're going to feel horrible when you get called out in front of, 100 people, then I'm trying to recognize you, but if that's not going to make you feel recognized, then I better not, So empowering like people to share how they best feel recognized. And then the other thing is like, as HR people, we're kind of living and breathing this, especially working for a recognition company. But I do think it's easy to forget that like not all managers are coming into their roles with a deep background of like the benefits of recognition. And so what are we doing to sort of get them up to speed and give them the tools and resources they need to understand like why we're doing this, what problem we're solving, what we're trying to accomplish, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, they need to see examples. They need to hear each other. They need to see what others are doing. And then there's an inherent, cover your ass type of moment as well, because you're giving out company money. And so am I doing this right? Is other people doing this differently than I am? So there's definitely some hesitation that you have to help people be comfortable with. I also say that for me, I've had a chance to attend a couple of the Gusto leadership meetings. And one of the things I took away that was really cool, at the start of their leadership meeting, they start with shout outs, with recognizing, just amongst the leaders, recognizing people that have done things within the team for them. The team members aren't there. I don't even know if the employees know that this happens in the leadership meeting, but if they don't, you now do. And if you didn't, if I wasn't supposed to say, I'm sorry. But I took that away as that to me signaled to all of the leaders around the room, even myself, that recognition was that important to the culture, that it was the first 5 or 10 minutes of the meeting, that your leadership meeting. And whether you're building into your status calls, your one-on-ones, your stand-ups, your other meetings, I think if you can build this into your culture and make it feel normal, make it feel common for leaders, the buy-in will get there, and the muscle will start getting built.
Totally. Awesome. And I think we're bleeding right into mistake number 4, which is leadership buy-in. And so, a mistake that we see organizations make is, maybe the program kind of lives with like one person, and other people on the leadership team don't really understand the point of it. They're not really bought in. And we know that any program, but especially recognition programs, can't just really live with one person. It has to be like a really team effort. And so talk a bit more about like some issues we're seeing around leadership buy-in and resourcing of the recognition program.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, because depending on the size of your company, the makeup of your HR team, the makeup of all, what else is going on, how recognition is resources is going to be very different in various companies. But for me, there's a couple common things. Usually the person who's actually in the system, being the admin, is usually a more junior or mid-level in terms of levels of the company person. And that person's often tasked with, this is your program, right? But imagine that employee trying to convince, in my case, in my example earlier in the conversation, I said I was having to walk into like the head of sales and try to get them to use the program more, right? It's a hard conversation, right? Now, there are, when I say leadership buy-in, I mean that the leaders are actually talking about recognition. And so if a lot of times that message from leader, I'd like the head of HR or the head of rewards or other people to be involved, though they may not be clicking the buttons of recognition, but in talking about it and raising the awareness and challenging those who aren't doing it, and those, getting involved in the recognition. And often that might mean that somebody's feeding them the information, helping them, but at the same time, that's a much different message. And I think leaders often, are judicious with what there comes from the head of HR. If you're in a larger company, what comes from them, they're very careful about and calculate about. And to me, if recognition is part of the culture you're trying to build, it's one of those ones where it's a good one. It should be a no-brainer to put that in sort of the talking track for any of your head of HRs, your C levels, your directors, your VPs, because that sets the tone, right? And others will do it if they see them involved and doing it. Okay.
Cool. And in terms of like what you were mentioning of kind of, if it lives with someone like me, who's a more junior level employee, and I'm trying to go up to these high level executives to be like, hey, I'm sorry to bother you. I really need you to start recognizing your people. What's something else that a junior HR person can be doing to like influence at the higher level of the organization for a program like this?
Yeah, and to me, I want to be clear. I think, even with, like, let's take junior employee, like, they should be comfortable having those conversations. In most companies, you have to be able to have conversations up. So there's nothing wrong with that. But the weight that carries is very different in the conversation when the head of HR asks the same question, right? So, but I do think there are ways that, as admins or as the people who have to run the programs, creating dashboards or creating summaries or creating comparisons about how, giving data is always a good way. And it kind of cuts through, levels and other things. And you kind of go, hey, this is how sales is doing versus rest of company marketing and product, right? And, this is where I want to see it improved or not. And I think at a leadership level, it's good to know how those things are happening, right? Now, I'd be careful that this is not a disciplinary thing. It's more of they don't know. And if they knew, they'd probably want to take action on it. So you're trying to help them understand it.
Totally. Awesome. Okay, great. And then let's move on to mistake number 5 here of like rewards not being meaningful. All too often we see organizations, set up really great rewards program, recognition program, managers are bought in, like people are, they'd like to get into it, but at the end of the day, the reward you're getting, maybe isn't meaningful on a personal level, or it's insignificant based on, the amount of effort required or that sort of thing. Talk to us a little bit about that problem and how we can get around it.
Yeah, I'm going to leave the side, like the dollar, the value of the reward to the funding question, right? So let's put that one aside for a second and talk more specifically about the meaningfulness of the actual reward. The employees need to be able to, the reward has to not be a takeaway. It has to be something that they actually want, or they are happy receiving, or that they will find use. And for me, I love when they're able to brag or involve other people, like their partners, et cetera, in them, because that just helps build the connection with the company even stronger. And so often, if the programs are points based or they're very hard to understand, where, I got 1,000 points and I have no idea what that means, what I'm getting, that takes away from it. If you're getting, if you're being forced to hear the reward is X, it is 2 tickets to, I don't know, something that I wouldn't want to go to, somebody else would want to go to, or whatever it is. It has to be something that the employees are actually going to find meaning and usefulness in. And I think that a lot of there are providers out there like Gusto now who have ways of doing this that are much better than when I started in recognition. And when I started in recognition, you're giving them giant catalogs to find lots of things through, and it actually got lost in translation. And so with programs like Gusto, you can actually get rewards that employees can very quickly find something that they want, and they can actually very quickly pull it out and go do whatever that reward is.
Totally. We saw shout out to Cam, who's on our product team. He redeemed a bunch of Gusto gift cards on a guitar that he had his eyes on for, ages. And I just think that was he shared it with the company and I think it was such a great example of like a recognition program really providing meaning to an employee, because every like he's so excited to get it. Every time he looks at his guitar, every time he plays his guitar, he's sort of reminded of like, oh, like this is all due to the recognition I received working here. So I thought that was a really cool gold star sort of example.
That was a fantastic example, and exactly what we mean by meaningful rewards, something that can actually be tied to something that people want.
Yeah. Awesome. Shout out Cam. And then number 6. So the sixth mistake we're sort of seeing organizations making is that, you're trying to do too much and you're a bit too rigid about it. And so like what are organizations doing here, and what do we want them to be doing instead?
Yeah, often these programs are designed and built, and there's technical involved and IT departments and everything. And so we've launched this program, and then we find out it's not it's not working, or it's not being used in the same way, or things happen, or what we wanted isn't right. And I think as HR professionals, often we've designed it, and there's lots of good reasons we've designed it that way. But then I think, after you've launched a program in particular, there's always some things that can be changed and adjusted based on how the program is functioning in the company, how people are using it or not using it. And I think being too rigid in terms of changing or adjusting the program, again, it's slow death, because that's just more time that people are going, being unhappy with the program. And so often it's hard to make the decision to make a change or to pull it back and fix it and then put it back out there, or turn it off for a month while the technical team takes away all those approval levels they built custom for you that cost too much money. Whatever that is, I think making those adjustments to let the program thrive is really important. And one of the things I love seeing is that people are getting much more comfortable with failure these days. And I think this is one of those areas, particularly with recognition, we can build it quickly and you can change it quickly, right? It's not like annual programs, benefits, other things which are much harder to change. And for this program, I would say, try not to hold on to, hey, we're going to change it annually. We'll change it next year, just like we do the other programs. Recognition can be changed pretty quickly for most processes and providers and guides, et cetera. And so change it, make it work. Don't hold on to it too long.
And what's the best way to sort of get, like, what are you looking at to help inform how the first 3 months are going of a recognition program, for example?
I mean, look, some of it's going to be stories and hearing back from the leaders how they're using it or not using it. Some of it will be from combing through the data in the recognition program. And some of it, if you can get surveys or feedback from people, especially in the early days of the program. I know the big recognition question that generally leads to a recognition program is in your annual employee survey. That's probably too long out. I don't want to find out in a year this program isn't working the way I want it to. I want to find out in the first 3 months and make some adjustments. And so if we can plan a survey or a subset of a survey, something to give us some data, that would be really great so that we can make an adjustment, especially in the early days. Trying to build a habit is such an interesting thing. If we're building the wrong habit and we don't fix it, we'll spend a year building the wrong habits and cementing those in. And then we'll spend a year trying to get them to undo. So if we can change it, let's change it quickly.
Totally. Awesome. And then we had a question come in that I just want to address, and it is, let me just pull it up here. It is the admin who ran our program has moved on from the company. How can I make sure that the program still gets used? I thought this was a great question, Kwesi. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Geez. I mean, for me, number one, I probably wouldn't. First mistake, I think we talked about it earlier. If the admin is the only person involved in the program, that's a problem. That's a challenge. Your program should have involvement from at least, the admin, whoever that person's leader is, and if that person's not the head of HR or the head of rewards, whatever it is, that person as well. And so you should be looking for 2 or 3 people at minimum involved in the program. I know often there will be these quarterly or annual check-ins with your program. Really, if you can get as many of those 3 people in that room so that everybody's understanding the status of the program and making decisions, that would be good. And then for me, often these programs are transitioned after. It's that somebody else, they've left, right? The program becomes stagnant, we've hired someone else, and then they're trying to figure it out. And so if there is a way to get any sort of overlap, even if the overlap is a transitional person who actually picks up the program, keeps it running until that replacement is brought in, or who can help keep the program so that transition can happen. It's really important for the programs not to go stagnant in that for those 1, 2, 3, 6 months while their backfill is being hired. And so importantly, so two things: get others involved, and if there is a transition, have the program go live with someone else while that person's backfill is being brought in.
Awesome. Okay, great. And we got one other question from Tamara, and it was, is there a way to see these mistakes in writing to refer to later? And what we'll do is keep an eye out, follow us on LinkedIn, and we'll post a blog and maybe even a YouTube video of sort of these top 6 mistakes when running a recognition program. And it looks like we'll send you some notes as well, Tamara. So hope that answers your question. Kwesi, we're at time here. Let's do a little wrap up, and thanks everybody so much for joining. If you got to jump off for another meeting, I understand. What would be your key kind of like 1, if possible, 2 takeaways from our conversation today? Like key mistake to avoid or key thing to keep in mind when rolling a recognition program?
Probably the first 2. Don't make it complicated. Like, get out of the way, make it easy, and fix and adjust it. Like, so if things are, I'd rather give more freedom and take those away if there's some problems with the program, but don't make it complicated, right? Your leaders, your managers have lots of other things to do, and trust me, they don't like doing these things. Though I think it's part of a manager's job to do these things, but make it easy for them. So don't make it complicated. And 2. Really, I know it's hard to get funding, especially in this current environment for these programs. But if you've got a 1 to 2% of payroll that you can get into this type of program, it returns. The ROI on those programs are much higher than they give back, even though it's hard to measure. And so it doesn't take a lot, but don't try not to do these programs with 0.1% or 0.2% of budget. It just doesn't work, right?
Totally.
Those are my 2.
Yeah. Cool. And those returns, we didn't really get into like a ton of success criteria things, but you're going to see these returns in your employee engagement, which relates to productivity, retention, which is like, I could go on for a long time about the importance of retention. I had my list here, a couple, and then improvement in your employer brand. So time to close roles, you're hiring, better talent. The returns are pretty endless there. I think my 1 takeaway, and this is for people launching any sort of program, is don't be afraid to fail and change. Like, don't be afraid to make changes if you get feedback that it's not working. Sometimes you have an idea in mind of how something's going to go and it doesn't go the way you want it to, and that's okay. Try to be as flexible as you can and adjust. Kwesi, thanks so much for joining me today, and everybody who tuned in. Really appreciate it. We'll hit you up with a blog post and YouTube video about this topic, and we'll see you next week for our AMA.
Thanks everyone for tuning in.